What if the only thing standing between you and your dreams is an emotion? Have you ever considered this? It's a thought that might be new to you, a revelation that can be both daunting and enthralling at the same time. This emotion, this invisible engine that drives so much of our behavior, is something we rarely give a second thought to. Yet, it might just be the key to unlocking the door to your full potential. Imagine an emotion so powerful, so ubiquitous, that it is deeply entrenched in every fiber of our being. A feeling so ancient, so primal that it predates our very civilization. This emotion has the power to either bind us, keeping us chained to our comfort zones, or to propel us forward into the unknown, pushing us to conquer every obstacle in our path. We all know this emotion, we've all it, for it is an inherent part of our human nature: fear. It is fear that often determines the path we choose, the decisions we make, and the life we lead. You might wonder, can fear ever be a catalyst for success? An interesting question, isn't it? A question that stirs contemplation and self-analysis. It's a paradox that is as perplexing as it is intriguing. It's something that might contradict your previous understanding and challenge your worldview. Well, today, let's explore this intriguing paradox. Consider the story of an individual named Edward. Edward was just like you or me, an everyday man leading an ordinary life with nothing exceptionally noteworthy about him. He wasn't blessed with superhuman abilities or extraordinary intellectual prowess. He was not renowned for any particular talent or skill. He was not the kind of person who stood out in a crowd or held a room's attention with his charisma. He was, by all accounts, the epitome of the average man. But there was one thing about Edward that made him remarkably different from most people. Edward harbored a deep-seated, unshakable fear, an irrational dread that completely dominated his life. This fear wasn't of spiders or heights or the dark, as many people often experience. No, Edward's fear was completely different, and in his much more daunting. Edward had an intense fear of public speaking. It wasn't merely a mild discomfort or a slight case of stage fright. It was a paralyzing, all-consuming terror that would grip him even at the mere thought of having to speak in front of a group. He would break into a cold sweat, his heart would pound uncontrollably in his chest, and he would be overcome with a sense of panic and dread. It was so severe that even the thought of speaking in front of a group would make his palms sweat and his heart pound. Edward worked as a software engineer in a reputable firm. Holding an esteemed and highly respected position, he was known to be a man of extraordinary talent. His understanding of complex algorithms, coding languages, and software architecture was unparalleled. In every line of code he wrote, every application he developed, his brilliance was, he was the kind of engineer who had the potential to change the direction of technology, to shape the future of software development. But underneath that outer shell of brilliance, a shadow lurked. This shadow was not of incompetence or lack of knowledge. No, it was something far more personal and far more debilitating. It was a fear, a deep-seated apprehension that kept him from reaching out, from putting forth his thoughts and ideas, from contributing during team meetings. It was a fear of rejection, of ridicule, of not being taken seriously. It wasn't that he didn't have valuable ideas, he had plenty. But every time he opened his mouth to speak, the words would die in his throat. This fear, like a silent enemy, was affecting his growth, his progress, his potential. He would often sit in there of his office staring at the screen, his mind buzzing with ideas, but his tongue tied by fear. He was painfully aware of the situation, of the trap he had set for himself. He realized he was entrapped in his own fear, which was hindering his growth. He knew he had to overcome this fear to move forward, to progress, to truly excel in his career. He realized he was trapped in his own fear, which hindered his growth. One day, Edward decided enough was enough. He had been living his life under the constant shadow of an all-encompassing fear, a dread that affected every aspect of his daily existence. The fear wasn't of something tangible like heights or spiders, but a fear of public speaking, a fear of standing in front of a crowd and sharing his thoughts, his ideas. He knew he could no longer let this paralyzing fear control and dictate his life. Driven a newfound determination, Edward took the first step towards overcoming his fear and joined a local public speaking club. The initial meetings were an absolute nightmare for him. Each time he took the stage, he felt like he was on the verge of a breakdown. His voice would crack under the pressure, His hands would shake uncontrollably, and he would forget his lines in the midst of the speech. Disappointment on the faces of the onlookers was palpable, and it was a blow to his confidence. But Edward was not one to give up so easily. He was determined to fight, to persist, not for anyone else but for himself. He practiced tirelessly day in and day out, rehearsing his speeches, working on his voice modulation and body language. Gradually, he started noticing a change. Voice stopped cracking, his hands were steadier, and he could remember his lines perfectly. A transformation was taking place. Was no longer the timid, afraid man he used to be. He was becoming more confident, more assertive, and his fear of public speaking began to wane. The club members noticed the change in him and started applauding his efforts. This only motivated him further. He persisted, practiced, and gradually his fear began to subside. Each time he stood on the podium, he felt the familiar rush of fear. Amplified by the silence of anticipation that filled the room, the pressure on him was immense. Yet, there was an intriguing allure that came with it, a strange kind of adrenaline rush that fueled his determination. This feeling, rather than deterring him, propelled him to face the challenge head-on. As he stepped forward, his heartbeat was in sync with the seconds ticking away. But he chose to face it, to feel it, and to continue anyway. In the face of trepidation, he found fortitude. The fear then began to serve a dual purpose. It was not only a vanguard against complacency, but also force for progress. Over time, Edward developed a new strategy. He began to see fear as an ally, not a foe. He started to harness this fear, transforming it into an excitement, a burning energy that radiated through him. He channeled this energy into creating vibrant, engaging, and compelling presentations. His audience was captivated, not just by words, but by the sheer energy with which he delivered them. His presentations became more dynamic, his ideas more persuasive. His fear, originally a hindrance, had become a tool, a catalyst sparking creativity and innovation. The transformation was evident. The journey was not smooth, but the evolution was certainly rewarding. Fast forward a few years, Edward is now a sought-after speaker in his field. From the fresh-faced novice he once was, having stepped into the world with uncertainty and apprehension, he has gradually transformed into an inspiring figure in his arena. Edward had always been bright, his mind a whirlwind of ideas and theories, but it was his fear that held him back. He was afraid of judgment, of not being good enough, of failure. Then it all changed. He decided to face his fear head-on. He chose to use it, to channel it into something that could propel him forward. His fear became his motivation, his drive to achieve the impossible. His every failure, every criticism, every setback started fueling his determination. He began studying extensively, grabbing every opportunity to learn and improve. He stepped out of his comfort zone, took the risks he never thought he would, accepted the challenges he once avoided. He began speaking at small local events, then at conferences, and soon his reputation transcended borders. His speeches were inspiring, thought-provoking, and filled with invaluable insights. They resonated with the audience, touched their hearts, and stirred their minds. Recognition followed. He was invited to speak at prestigious events, applauded for his courage, and appreciated for his wisdom. His journey was not an easy one. It was filled with trials and tribulations, but his resilience saw him through. His fear, which once held him back, had indeed become the driving force of his success. So, what can we glean from the compelling tale of Edward? The initial lesson that surfaces is the universality of fear. This instinctive emotion is something that every individual, regardless of their age, culture, or experiences, goes through at some point. Yet, it is crucial to remember that fear only transforms into an impediment when we permit it to dictate our decisions, paralyzing us into inaction and preventing us from achieving our true potential. The second point that Edward's journey enlightens us about is the approach to tackling fear. It is not about eliminating or denying its existence, but about learning to forge ahead despite its looming presence. The focus is not on eradicating fear. It's about acknowledging its presence, yet choosing to act despite it. It's about the courage to feel the fear, stare it down, and do it anyway. The third essential takeaway from Edward's experience is the power of fear as a motivational tool. Fear has the latent ability to drive you beyond the boundaries of your comfort zone, propelling you to take calculated risks that you may have previously shied away from. As in Edward's case, fear was not a stumbling block, but a catalyst that pushed him to make bold moves and ultimately to evolve, grow, and thrive. Finally, we arrive at the last lesson that Edward's story, the mastery over fear, is an ongoing endeavor that demands persistence and repeated practice. Overcoming fear isn't a singular occurrence or achievement. Instead, it's a continuous journey. Every time you face your fear head-on, you emerge a tad stronger, a bit braver, and significantly resilient. Lastly, overcoming fear requires persistence and practice. It's not a one-time event, but a continuous process. Each time you face your fear, you become a little stronger, a little braver. In essence, fear is not the enemy. It's a companion on the journey to success. It's the uninvited guest that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. It's the shadow that looms over your ambitions, doubts on your abilities. However, it doesn't have to be the proverbial monster under your bed. Instead, it can be an ally, a guide, propelling you forward on the path to triumph. The emotion of fear has long been misunderstood, often being labeled as a negative, something to be avoided. But in reality, fear is an instinctual response, a protective device evolved over millions of years to safeguard us from potential harm. The problem arises not from feeling fear, but in how we respond to it. By recognizing this emotion, by acknowledging its presence, we can attempt to understand its root. What is it that we're afraid of? Failure, rejection, uncertainty. By identifying the source, we can better comprehend our fears. We can break them down into manageable pieces. Once we've done that, we can start taking the next step towards overcoming it. Embracing the fear. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's in this acceptance that we find our inner courage. It means feeling the fear, being terrified, but not allowing it to dictate your actions. Instead, you move forward, you step into the unknown, you do it anyway. Doing can transform this daunting emotion into a powerful tool for personal growth. This transformation opens up a world where fear becomes a motivator, a catalyst rather than a roadblock. It encourages you to step out of your comfort zone, to take risks, and to aim higher. When fear becomes a motivator, it fuels ambition, it fuels desire to improve, to achieve, to succeed. It becomes a constructive force, driving personal growth and fostering resilience. It helps to create a mindset that views challenges not as insurmountable obstacles, but as valuable learning opportunities, pushing you to strive for success. So, remember the tale of Edward, next time fear creeps in. Recall his struggle, his perseverance, and his ultimate success. Remember that fear can become the catalyst for your success if you choose to face it.